Welcome to Healing Out Loud, Episode 7, The Mother Wound, Healing the Hurt That Was Never Meant to Be Yours. Now, this is a big one for me. Whether you're joining me for the very first time or you've been following along since Episode 1, I want to thank you for being here. I'm Donna Blanchard, the author of Heal the Pain and Breaking the Chains, creator of the Why You Still Feel Stuck course, and your host here on Healing Out Loud. Many of the topics we talk about on this podcast are also woven throughout my books because healing isn't just about understanding our past, it's about learning how to move forward with greater awareness, compassion, and hope. Today's episode is one I've carried in my heart for a very long time. And before we begin, I want to say something important. This episode is not about blaming mothers. Most mothers love their children the best way they knew how. Many carried their own wounds, and many were doing the best that they could with the tools that they had. Understanding your own mother's story doesn't erase your own pain, but it can help us to understand it. And understanding is often where healing begins. So today, I'm going to share parts of my own story, not because it's unique, but because I know so many of you carry a similar ache. Maybe your mother left. Maybe she was unemotionally available. Maybe she struggled with addiction, mental illness, or her own trauma. Or maybe she was physically present, but you never truly felt seen, comfortable, or emotionally safe. Whatever your story looks like, I hope today reminds you that you're not alone. Now, what is the mother wound? The mother wound isn't an official diagnosis. It's a term often used to describe the emotional pain that develops when our relationship with our mother or the person who raised us left, left us feeling unseen, unwanted, emotionally disconnected, or unsafe. It doesn't always come from abuse. Sometimes it comes from what was missing: the comfort, encouragement, affection, reassurance, the feeling that someone was always in your corner. Children naturally believe the world revolves around them. So when something goes wrong in the family, they rarely think, something must be happening to my parent. Instead, they think, something must be wrong with me. That belief can quietly follow us into adulthood. It can shape us the way we see ourselves, the way we love, the way we trust, and the way we move through life. Now, my story. I grew up with a mother, a father, and three sisters. Looking back, I believed we had a very loving, stable family. Like most children, I assumed life would always stay that way. Then, when I was 14 years old, everything changed. My mother left her family and ended her marriage of 18 years. I couldn't comprehend what had happened. The shock was so overwhelming that my body and mind simply shut down. I was hospitalized with what was called a nervous breakdown. I'll never forget the day my father sat us down and told us that our mother was leaving and that she was a lesbian. Today's society is such more accepting than it was then. But back in the 70s, that wasn't something people talked about openly. There was a tremendous stigma. As a 14-year-old girl, I was overwhelmed with shame, embarrassment, confusion, and heartbreak. And my father was deeply hurt. He was angry. We couldn't even mention my mother's name without conversation ending with an explosion. So we stopped talking about her. We stopped talking about our feelings. We learned to carry them quietly. My sisters and I chose to stay with our father. And at that time, we believed our mother's new lifestyle wasn't an appropriate place for us. But looking back now, I think it was something deeper. As children, it felt like she had left us. And if she chose to leave, we weren't going with her. That sentence still brings tears to my eyes because now that's how a child thinks. A child doesn't understand adult decisions. A child simply wonders, why wasn't I enough for you to stay? For years, I believed that if I had been different, better, more lovable, maybe even more, maybe she would have stayed. Children have the way of making someone else's choices mean something about themselves. I carried that belief for far longer than I realized. The grief that no one talks about. People often think grief only happens when someone dies. But there's another kind of grief, the grief of someone still being alive. Yet you no longer being emotionally present in your life. Over the next 50 years, my relationship with my mother was strained. There were long periods, sometimes as many as 20 years, when we didn't see or speak to one another. Or occasionally we would try to reconnect. Sometimes it lasted, sometimes it didn't. But for me, I never truly found my way back to having the mother daughter relationship I had longed for. I missed having my mom beside me through my biggest milestones: my marriage, the birth of my two daughters, watching them grow, becoming a grandmother, and the moments when you instantly pick up the phone and call your mom. Those were moments of quiet grief. What I was grieving wasn't the loss of my mother, I was grieving the relationship I wish I could have had. The conversations we never shared, the memories that we never made, the comfort I longed for but didn't know how to ask for. And that's one of the hardest parts of the mother wound. You're grieving someone who is still alive. You're grieving what could have been, and that's a different kind of heartbreak, one that many people carry silently. Maybe you've carried it too. How the mother wound shaped my life. Looking back now, I can see that the mother wound didn't end when I was 14. That was only where it began. The wound quietly followed me until adulthood, and at that time I didn't recognize it. I thought it was simply making choices, trying to build a life, trying to find happiness, but underneath so many of those choices, I was a frightened 14-year-old girl who still wondered if she was enough. The mother wound affected my relationships. It affected my two marriages. It affected the relationship I had with my daughters. It affected how I saw myself. I struggled to trust. I struggled to receive love because part of me was always waiting for it to disappear. I often questioned people's intentions. I feared being abandoned again. And sometimes, without even realizing it, I pushed people away before they had a chance to hurt me. Have you ever done that before? Wanted love so badly, yet found it difficult to truly let someone in. Maybe you've convinced yourself you're better off doing everything on your own. Maybe you've become the strong one, the caregiver, the fixer, the one who takes care of everyone else while quietly carrying your own pain. Sometimes those patterns begin much earlier than we realize. Looking for love in the wrong places. When we carry emotional wounds from childhood, we often spend years looking for someone else to heal them. We look for partners who will finally make us feel chosen, accepted, safe, enough. But the problem is, no relationship can heal a wound that we haven't acknowledged ourselves. I know that now, but I certainly didn't know it then. I spent years searching for love while believing my worth depended on someone else's ability to give it. It left me vulnerable. It left me settling for less than I deserved. It left me believing that losing myself was the price of being loved. Looking back now, I wasn't really looking for a husband. I was still looking for my mom. I think many of us do that without ever realizing it. We search for someone to fill the emptiness left by someone else. But healing begins when we realize that no one else can give us what we first need to give ourselves. Now, my coping strategy, for me, the emotional pain eventually found another outlet: an eating disorder. Looking back now, I know it was never really about food. It wasn't about being thin. It wasn't about the appearance. It was about trying to manage emotions that felt too overwhelming to carry. Food became something I could control when life felt completely out of control. It became my comfort, my distraction, sometimes my punishment. Eventually, it became my prison. The eating disorder didn't solve my pain, it simply distracted me from it until I couldn't anymore. That's the thing about coping strategies, whether it's food, alcohol, overworking, people pleasing, perfectionism, shopping, or staying constantly busy. They help us survive for a while, but eventually they ask us to face what we're trying so hard not to feel. For me, that was the grief of losing my mother, the grief of feeling abandoned, the grief of believing I wasn't enough, and the grief of spending years searching for something outside of myself that had to be found within. Understanding without excusing. One of the biggest lessons I've learned through my own healing is that understanding someone isn't the same as excusing them. As I grow older, I begin to see my mother differently, not just as my mother, but as a woman who had her own struggles, her own fears, and her own wounds. I don't know everything she carried, and perhaps I never will, but I do know this. People who haven't healed often make decisions from places of pain rather than peace. Understanding that has helped softened my heart. It hasn't erased what happened, it hasn't erased the grief, but it has helped me to let go of some of the anger I carried for so many years. Because holding on to the anger didn't protect me, it only kept me connected to the pain. Forgiveness isn't saying what happened was okay. Forgiveness is choosing not to let someone else's choices to continue to control your life. That doesn't mean reconciliation is always possible, and it doesn't mean trust automatically returns. Sometimes healing happens together, sometimes it happens apart. Either way, healing is possible. Now, breaking the cycle. One of the greatest gifts healing has given me is the opportunity to stop passing pain from one generation to the next. Will I always get it right? Of course not. No parent does. But today, I try to do something very differently. When I've made mistakes with my daughters, I've apologized. When we have difficult conversations, I've tried to listen instead of becoming defensive. I've learned that vulnerability creates connection. I've learned that saying I'm sorry doesn't make me weak, it makes me human. Every generation has the opportunity to change things and do it differently, to communicate a little better, to love a little bit more openly, to choose healing over silence. That's how generational cycles begin to change. Not through perfection, but through awareness. And what has healing taught me? If there's one thing I hope you take away from today's episode, it's this. Your childhood may explain you, but it doesn't define you. Healing doesn't erase what happened. It doesn't pretend the pain wasn't real. Healing allows us to understand our story without becoming trapped in it. It helps us recognize that the frightened child inside us still deserves love, compassion, and safety. And perhaps the most beautiful part about healing is realizing that we can begin giving ourselves what we spend so many years hoping someone else would give us. That doesn't happen overnight. It's a journey. Some days you'll take two steps forward, and some days you'll feel like you've taken one step back. That's okay. Healing isn't measured by perfection, it's, measured. it's measured by awareness, by growth, by choosing over and over again to meet yourself with compassion instead of criticism. Now, here are some reflection questions. As always, I'd like to leave you with a few questions to reflect on this week. What did you need from your mother that you didn't receive? How has that shaped the way you see yourself today? In what ways has the mother wound shown up in your relationships? Is there a younger version of yourself who is still longing to be seen, comforted, and chosen? And finally, what is one small way you can begin offering yourself the love, acceptance, and compassion you've been searching for? Take your time with these questions. There are no right or wrong answers. Sometimes simply becoming aware is the beginning of healing. If today's episode stirred something inside you, I hope you'll remember this. You are not broken. You adapted to experiences that were incredibly painful. Those adaptations may have helped you survive, but they don't have to define the rest of your life. Healing is possible. I've lived it. And I believe it's possible for you too. If today's conversation resonated with you, I'd love for you to follow the podcast, leave a review, or share this episode with someone who may need to hear it. And if you'd like to go even deeper, you can find more of my story and healing journey in my books, Heal the Pain and Breaking the Chains. Thank you for spending the time with me. It truly means more than you know. And until next time, remember, healing doesn't erase your story, it helps you rewrite the chapters that are coming next. In our next episode of Healing Out Loud, we'll explore the father wound. We'll talk about our relationships with our father or the absence of one can influence our confidence, our self worth, our relationships, and even the expectations we carry into adulthood. Whether your father was present, absent, loving, critical, or emotionally unavailable, his influence still may shaping parts of your life today. And I hope you join me in that conversation. Until then, take gentle care of yourself, one small step at a time, because you are worth healing.